Um, Welcome to the Hancock Commons Faculty Dinner Series. It's a pleasure to have you tonight and to introduce Professor Amy Swanson in the dance department at Colgate University. We do this, it's very informal. The introduction is also informal. We have been doing this for a number of years. We have been trying to create a talk that that is informal. Students feel comfortable to ask questions during the talk, and it's really meant to be a place where we can have a nice conversation with faculty and students. We're trying to move outside the classroom and to make it more of a space where this kind of moment can happen between faculty and students. So Professor Swanson does work. I have been looking into what you do. It sounds really interesting. This is connected with dancing in Senegal, and I think has to do with fluidity, gender fluidity in performance and in the stage in a place where it's very difficult to be explicit about these identities in your regular life. The stage kind of opens up the space for people to explore those identities. But anyway, that's just a quick introduction. It's a pleasure to have you here, Amy, and welcome to the Hancock Commons.
Thank you so much, Antonio. I really appreciate you, your introduction and that summary of my research in clearer words than I could have described it. So thank you for that. I know Pilar. Oh, Pilar's here. Great.
Hi, Amy. Before you continue, I would like, we had sort of a problem with dinner. Dinner is really wonderful, but it was terribly late today.
Oh, okay.
So apparently the dinner is now arriving to 94 and 113. I apologize, everybody. Brianna has been standing in the rain for like 35 minutes waiting for the person to deliver the food. But all the food is now in. Sorry.
That's okay. Should we keep going or should we wait a minute until people have their food, or what would be best?
I don't know. I mean, those of you, well, I'm supposing that the people that are not in maybe are the people who are picking up their food. Yeah, Amy. I say we go ahead.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you so much, Amy. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to thank both Pilar and Antonio for inviting me to share my life story. I'm really happy to be here. I also want to thank Amanda Stewart and Brianna Torres for your help organizing this series, and everyone for being here. Zoom fatigue is very real, so I just appreciate you all taking the time to be on Zoom for another 30 minutes or 45 minutes or however long we're here together. All right, I'm gonna jump right in. So my talk is titled Dancing Through Uncertainty, How Sticking With It Expanded My World. October 15th, 2020. After a long day of teaching, I'm unwinding by sewing face masks with some brightly colored fall-themed fabric scraps that I picked up in Senegal a few years ago. In this moment of complete presence, as my anxieties and exhaustion dissipate and I become completely immersed in feeding fabric through my machine, gratitude seeps in. I feel grateful for having picked up this particular fabric on that trip, grateful that a fortuitous encounter more than 10 years ago led to me learning how to sew, and grateful for this moment of calm amidst the chaos of our world today. August 2010. It's Ramadan, and the dance rehearsals that I'd structured my days around for the past several months are all on pause. Without a plan, I reach for a phone number. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. About a month or two previously, I'd met a group of fashion designers during a photo shoot that I was a part of with a dance company, Afrikanam. As often happens in Senegal, a meaningful and unexpected exchange took place. One of the designers, Abib, was fascinated by the pair of socks that I was knitting during breaks from the photo shoot. He offered to teach me how to sew if I taught him how to knit. He couldn't have had any idea that I'd been wanting to learn how to sew for most of my life. A few days into Ramadan with little else to do besides studying French and Wolof, I gave him a call. Abib meets me with the openness and generosity characteristic of so many Senegalese people who make it hard to think about going home. He immediately welcomes me into his sewing studio, part of the artist commune, Les Petites Pierres, and takes me on as a sort of apprenti or apprentice. For the next several weeks, fueled from the meal that breaks the fast at sundown, I spend my nights glued to an industrial sewing machine, my mind spinning with ideas of what to learn and what to make. I go to bed each morning as the sun rises, happily exhausted from hours of engaging in this new creative outlet guided by a new friend, who I never taught how to knit. I want to backtrack a bit to January 2010. I board a flight to Dakar with little more than a change of clothes, anti-malaria medication, and a different phone number, this one belonging to Abdoulaye Kamara, a former dancer with Ballet d'Afrique Noire. I'm a somewhat recent college graduate with a very short-term plan, and that's it. I'm on my way to Senegal in order to train in traditional West African dance and better understand the cultural context of this form that I had become enamored with over the past 2 years. I recently quit my 2 jobs and have no clue as to what would come next beyond what was planned as a 3-month trip. This is in the midst of the Great Recession, not one that parallels the uncertainty of our present day situation, but still an economic situation that makes planning for a career particularly daunting. As I wait to board that flight with a large group of Senegalese people returning home for the annual Magal pilgrimage to the city of Touba, as I listen to the unfamiliar sounds of the Wolof language around me and smell the calming scent of churai, or Senegalese incense used to perfume the body, I have no clue that this will be a transformative adventure, one that would significantly shape my life in multiple ways. I want to back up even further to fall of 2007. I'm a senior dance major at the University of Illinois. For the first time in my 4 years here, a class in West African dance is offered. This class comes at a time when I'm battling with existential questions about my choice to study dance and uncertainties about what would come after graduation. I had come close to changing my major at the beginning of my junior year, convinced that the competitive dance industry was not one in which I could succeed, that its demands on my time, body, and energy were too much to sustain into adulthood. At that time, there seemed to be a monolithic trajectory of what was expected of dance majors after college. Everyone moved to New York City and survived by taking on various service jobs, while searching for dance gigs, often rehearsing late into the night after long days of work and just barely making ends meet. Over time in college, I came to realize that this insular postmodern dance community in New York likely mirrored the people around me in the close-knit dance department at the University of Illinois, almost entirely white and middle class. Understanding that my identities granted me the privilege of inclusion in this community, I was unsatisfied. This monolithic trajectory and singular demographic felt more and more limiting, in stark contrast to the freedom that dancing itself offered. Dance for me had always been an emancipatory and empowering act. A quiet person since preschool, I felt fully alive while moving my body. There is something incredibly vital to the act of coordinating my body's small and large movements to music, engaging all at once my physicality, intellect, and artistry. I wanted to participate in the world in a way that mirrored the expansiveness I felt while dancing. But pursuing dance seemed more and more flat and narrow. Despite these doubts, thinking about changing my major actually made me really sad. I had been dancing since the age of 3 and could not picture my life without dance being at the center. So I stuck with it. When the Ghanaian dancer Jibril Kamara was hired as an adjunct professor to teach West African dance, I'd had no previous exposure to African dance and was a bit terrified, but I enrolled in the course. I ended up having a wonderful experience, not only because the dance form itself was challenging in a distinctly pleasurable way, or because each class was accompanied by at least 3 live drummers, but because it opened my eyes to a way that dance could function that seemed to differ drastically from the postmodern choreography that all of my other courses focused on. GB, as he was called, would discuss the purpose behind each dance, whether it served as part of an initiation ceremony or the start of the harvest season. The energy in this class was unlike anything I'd experienced before. The course opened up more questions and curiosities than it provided answers. I knew I had so much more to learn, and so I continued training with GB after the semester ended. He was not rehired by the university for bureaucratic reasons, but he taught weekly community classes and put together a small company. Over the next year and a half, I went to his classes religiously and performed in local schools and farmers markets with his makeshift company. When my partner at the time was awarded a Fulbright to spend a year researching in Senegal, the opportunity to travel to Dakar opened up for me. GB had lived in Dakar for about 20 years before immigrating to the US. He recommended training in Dakar with his friend Abdoulaye, and so there I was in January 2010 at the airport, a phone number in hand. In Senegal, everything was new. I distinctly remember walking around an outdoor market on my very first day there, absorbing the unfamiliar sights, sounds, and smells, and it dawning on me how much more I wanted to learn. I knew on day 1 that 3 months was not nearly enough. I didn't even speak the local languages, never mind understand the customs and worldviews that shaped daily life in Dakar. I felt like a sponge, willing and eager to soak everything in little by little. I met up with Abdoulaye and started dancing with him within that first week. Soon my days were filled with long dance lessons, studying French and Wolof and attempting to navigate the city's public transportation system, oftentimes failing. Although I also suffered at times from mysterious illnesses and struggled with getting lost and not having the language competency to find my way, I held on to the sense of openness and willingness. I'd saved enough money to not have to work for several months and felt a sense of freedom that I had never felt before. I was dancing every day because it was exactly what I wanted to be doing. Not because I needed the course credit, not because I was working towards integrating any particular dance company. Just as I found myself a few days ago immersed in the present moment of feeding fabric through my sewing machine, I simply immersed myself in the experience of learning and dancing. I extended my return ticket twice, turning a 3-month trip into a year abroad, unattached to any program or job, but just to be and to learn. May 2010. After the first few months, I feel eager to expand further beyond what Abdoulaye has to offer. In search of something else, I walk every day to the cultural center, Blaise Senghor, where I watch various open rehearsals. At Blaise Senghor, multiple dance companies and music groups rehearse simultaneously in their indoor and outdoor spaces. People also congregate in the courtyard where coffee, peanuts, and fresh juices are sold. It's a lively place, and I feel embraced once again by the artists who work there. One group in particular catches my attention. Unlike the other groups composed entirely of local Dakarois dancers who walk from their nearby homes to Blaise Senghor, this group is composed of about 15 dancers from various Francophone African countries. The Kenyan choreographer, Opio Okash, who lives between Paris and Nairobi, leads the group each day through a number of improvisation and choreographic exercises that actually remind me a lot of the postmodern choreography that I'd studied in college. I was fascinated by their daily rehearsals and the resemblances it bore with a dance form I'd studied in the United States, one that I'd been taught had evolved out of a long lineage of American modern dance artists. I soon learned that this was a 6-week intensive workshop organized by the Congolese choreographer, Andrea Wamba, who lives in Dakar and hosts artists from across the continent for the duration of the workshop. June 2010. It's the last week of the 6-week workshop and the dancers are practicing an exercise in pairs, but are an odd number. Opio asks me to join, and through my participation, by breaking the fourth wall that had separated me as a spectator until that point, my world changes. I start to get to know the dancers and am invited to their performance at the end of the workshop. By this point, my French is just barely good enough that after the performance, I comfortably join the performers at a nearby bar and hang out late into the night. As I learn more about contemporary dance in Senegal, but also in the various countries that the artists are from, it dawns on me that up until that point, I had perceived Senegal and its dance forms in their difference. I viewed dance and all things Senegalese from a perspective shaped in part by my undergraduate education of alterity. What drew me to Senegal was the opportunity to learn new dances, languages, and worldviews that I had internalized as being very different from my own. But what kept me going back year after year over the past decade was this realization of similarity. Why, in my 2 decades as a dancer and audience member, and my 4 years of studying dance in higher education, had I not been exposed to contemporary, experimental, improvisational dance in Senegal or anywhere in Africa? Why had I always received the idea that the contemporary was the prerogative of the United States and Western Europe, and that Africa was the source of dance traditions? Why was succession through various levels of ballet and modern dance required for graduation as a dance major, while West African dance, along with Balinese dance and capoeira, were grouped together to fulfill a cultural dance elective? While I could not fully articulate these questions at the time, I was experiencing them, witnessing the dissolution of my prior understandings and their replacement with a much more nuanced realization. These questions revealed not only the problems with my undergraduate curriculum, but much larger issues that had to do with the history of colonialism and ongoing widespread logics that largely shaped how I, as a white American, viewed the world. Eventually, these questions would lead me to pursue a PhD and to do what I'm doing now in hopes of contributing to discourses about African dance through my research, writing, and teaching. September 2010, Ramadan has ended. I worry about encroaching on Abib's time and start to spend less time sewing. The days are hot, long, humid, and completely unstructured. I wake up in the morning, the long, sticky day ahead seeming purposeless, without a plan. This is not a new feeling. Without dance studios and regular dance classes in Dakar, every dance practice must be meticulously planned in advance, from finding the people and space to settling on a fee. I cannot simply wake up and decide to go take a dance class as I might do in American cities. Although by this point I've started substitute teaching at the international school in Dakar, I still do not have regular work. I start to embody a sensibility that many Senegalese seem to have, a feeling of flexibility, adaptability, and constant readiness. Ready to be called in at 7 in the morning to substitute teach for the day, or ready for a long day of simply surviving the heat and humidity that drains me of energy. Ready to navigate ankle-deep water when a sudden downpour during the rainy season quickly floods the roads outside. Since stopping the regular dance lessons with Abdullah back in May, stretches of downtime have become equally as common as stretches of intense artistic practice, the next of which is about to start. Wamba's next contemporary dance workshop is scheduled for the second half of September and most of the month of October at the Foyer des Jeunes de Wakam. Having stayed in touch with one of the dancers from the June workshop, I figure out how to apply to participate and am accepted. 6 days a week for 6 weeks, I dance from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. apart from a lunch break. I get to know the group of dancers, different from the previous group, but similarly international. The dancing is incredibly rigorous in a space that is not meant to be danced in. Each morning, we assemble large pieces of bright blue foam floor that provides protection from the unforgiving tiles underneath. I'm often physically exhausted, hardly able to walk from soreness at the end of the day, but I do not hold the same reservations I held about dance as a college student. Despite the pain, I'm nothing but happy and excited to be there each and every day, willing and eager to soak it all in like a sponge. Like so many other moments in my young adult life, I have no clue where this is leading or what comes next. But this time I don't care. I'm simply there in the moment, absorbing into my flesh and bones the movement styles that the instructors teach, internalizing intellectually their choreographic processes. This is some of the most influential dance training I've ever had, and it remains deeply ingrained in my body, emerging each time I step into a dance studio. Towards the end of October, my body in need of a break, but my mind dreading the end of this amazing journey, I sit down to journal with my morning coffee and write something along the lines of, how can I stay involved in this for the rest of my life? Journaling about that question, recognizing in the moment that this has been an incredibly meaningful experience for me, one that completely shifted my relationship to dance. I don't have answers. I envision returning to Senegal for the next workshop in a year, which I do. Beyond that, I don't know. It takes a lot of time, reflection, conversations, and experiences in the United States and in Senegal to eventually decide that I can keep this at the center of my life by pursuing a PhD that would allow me to conduct in-depth research about contemporary dance in Senegal. I didn't know as a college student that I wanted to be a professor. If someone had told me that I might go to graduate school for a PhD, I would not have believed them. I was never introduced to contemporary dance in Africa in college. What I hope this story reveals is that it took consistently following the thing that made me feel fully alive, whether it was traditional West African dance or immersion in a culture and languages that were not my own, or learning how to sew, or pushing my body for long days of intensive contemporary dancing. It was connecting with people and cultivating relationships that allowed me to feel safe and courageous enough to make the decision over and over again to pick up the phone, to stick with it. At times it was being willing and able to turn off the voices of my professors that stayed in my head well beyond graduation and repeated the singular New York City narrative as the path to success. It was finding my own path by being open, willing, and ready, sewing, laughing, and dancing my way through uncertainty. Thank you.
Can we all unmute and clap really loud? Wow! Be as loud as you can. Zoom is too quiet. That was fantastic.
Thank you so
Wow.
much. Julia.
So do you guys have questions or anything? Please, one of the things I say is that when people come here, we ask people to be personal, to tell us, to give us a little part of them. But that means that you also have to be willing to break that wall and be a little bit more open. because, it's not fair if we only ask that from our guest. So where are you? What do you have to say? What did they tell you? How did it speak to you? What questions did it raise?
Oh yeah, I have a question. Do you still keep in contact with some of the connections with the people you made in Dakar?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Keegan. Yeah. So Andrea Wambo, who I mentioned, he was the person who organizes these contemporary dance workshops. Very much still in touch with him. He's someone who I've written about and really focused on that workshop, particularly in my research. Yeah, and even like the artists who taught me how to sew, they're still friends. Every time I go back to Senegal, I'm commissioning projects and having them make like beautiful clothing and bags for me and friends. Yeah, definitely. Not every single person, but a lot of people, yeah.
I have a question. So first off, thank you for sharing with us. That was a very interesting story. I was just like,
I know.
I guess I'm wondering, like, how do you, like, since working at Colgate, how have you and how do you try to educate your students about and like shift the narrative about, the normalized ideas about different types of dance, and how do you infuse the like kind of philosophy that you talked about into the work that you're doing and in conversations with students?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I'll answer that in terms of my dance practice classes, because I teach both dance practice and dance studies here at Colgate, but I teach contemporary dance, and I'm really explicit that the contemporary dance that I teach is pretty eclectic in terms of what the sort of influence and sources are. So I talk about my training, and I talk about how what I'm doing is just as much influenced by my background in modern dance and postmodern dance as it is in my training in Senegal. And I'm also, even though it's a practice class, I have students read, so they do learn about how African aesthetics and African movement principles have always influenced modern dance and contemporary dance in the United States. Often it has gone completely uncited and uncredited, and it's an influence that has largely been erased, but we talk about that and learn about it. So I'm hoping that I'm kind of teaching students in a way that looks at contemporary dance as influent, like very much an intercultural form. So yeah, that's one of the things, but that's, I mean, it's something I'm always thinking about, and just thinking about different ways to cite my sources, I guess. And a lot of my sources are coming from Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, as someone in your dance studies class, I just wanted to emphasize how much I appreciate how you have worked towards making us really like question our cultures and our experiences in dance, and like why we've been raised to think that like ballet, like Western ballet is like the default, and how like we should really analyze the different dance methods and like different cultures of different societies, and how like we as with our own identities get to interact with that.
Great, yeah. Thank you so much, Delaney, for bringing that up. Definitely, and now you know a little bit about where that comes from, and a lot of it is my own frustrations with like how I was trained as a college student in a dance program. So I'm really trying to shift the narrative and move beyond what my dance department as a college student prioritized. So yeah.
Amy, could I ask, what are you doing now during COVID? How are you thinking about the body and about movement and connectivity in such a isolated time?
How am I thinking about movement and the body in this time? Was that the question?
And what are you doing to sort of come back to the body?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's been challenging. It's been challenging largely because I haven't been dancing a lot. And I think early in the pandemic, it was exciting to me that so many people were offering dance classes on Zoom. And so I tried that out, but after a couple of weeks, it just wasn't the same. I mean, obviously it's not the same, but I think I was really missing so much of, you know, dancing for me is a lot about sharing space with other people, like physical space, not virtual space. So without that, I just didn't last very long, and I kind of stopped dancing a lot. So I haven't been dancing for months, and that's been really hard. Other ways that I'm kind of coming back to my body and still having an embodied practice are largely like getting outside, going hiking a lot, going running, biking. Other sort of embodied physical activities have been really, really, really crucial to me over the past several months. But not a lot of dancing. I really miss it. Yeah.
I had a quick question about just your relationship with dance in general. So I know, like in a lot of dancers' careers, they have a time where they fall in love with dance, and then they sort of fall out of love with dance, or maybe just they don't enjoy it in the same way. Did you ever feel that in your time in Senegal, or at any time in your life? And how did you sort of overcome that, or not succumb to like falling out of love with dance?
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a huge part of my journey as a dancer, just my relationship to dance constantly shifting and changing. Um, yeah, I mean, part of what I tried to communicate in this story is how often I questioned it in college. Like while I was majoring in dance and dancing all the time, there were moments when I just wasn't getting a lot of pleasure out of it, wasn't feeling really, you know, passionate about dance, that it started to feel really limiting in some ways. So my time in Senegal really shifted that, because especially that year in 2010, that was my first trip to Senegal, but I've gone back repeatedly over the past decade. But that year in 2010 was just like every dance thing I was doing was amazing, and I loved it the entire time. Yeah, I mean, since I feel like it when I'm in the right space and with the right people in the right community, I love it, but those conditions aren't always there. So it really, really, really shifts. But I'm glad that I've always come back to it and stuck with it in different ways.
I have a question about you talked a little bit about this, but how did you feel it was like, how difficult was it to navigate a new culture and at the same time try to learn something new from it? Because I imagine your time in Senegal was definitely very different than like what you experienced in the US.
Yeah, very, very different. Everything was new. And it's not just one foreign language, it's at least two, if not more, because French is sort of the official language, but it's no one's native language. So most people are speaking Wolof and other languages, you know, in their homes and on the streets. And I went, you know, really ignorantly with almost no French at all. So I was trying to learn multiple languages at the same time, and also learn all these different artistic forms that I was interested in. But it was challenging for sure, but there was something just so, like, I just felt so open while I was there. I just felt really willing to be in that process of just being like really stupid in a lot of ways, not knowing anything, but little by little just kind of absorbing it. That just felt really good that first year. I think, you know, now when I go back, now that I'm older and I'm not like in my 20s and recently graduated from college, but I'm a professor, it's almost harder now, because there are these new expectations that I think other people expect of me, or that I expect of myself, that my French and Welsh should be fluent, and I should be well versed in every single thing, and you know, I should just know everything, but I still don't. Like, it's still so new to me. So it's almost harder now, like where I'm at now in my career, to be in that situation. But the first time I went, it just felt great. Like, okay, I don't know anything. I'm just gonna learn it all. It's gonna be great. That was my attitude. So yeah.
Now, Everybody should have that opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. And it definitely, I feel like I was in a really privileged position to be able to like save enough money to buy a ticket to go there and to live there without having to work. And I know that that's not everyone's situation after college, but I definitely would encourage people to try to save money, try to just, take yourself on an adventure and learn something really new. Yeah, I could not have imagined how much it changed my life as much as it did. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for this. This really interesting. I have two questions, but you already kind of answered one about. I wanted to hear more about the language part. I was curious to hear that because I found it really intriguing and super interesting that you're willing to go to a place where you don't speak the language. And more than that, because many of us do that, but to stay there. I found this really, it's difficult. It's hard to stay in a place, to decide to stay. And I want to hear you talking about that. Part of me was thinking that I mean, dance is also a type of language. So maybe I was in my mind thinking that this is how, in a way, you communicate with your new friends and the people you learn to, to know. But I mean, I was also struck by when you say the contemporary. The contemporary is usually a prerogative of United States or maybe Europe here. The traditional, you link the traditional with Africa, Latin America. That really an interesting. I think that for the students is really an interesting insight into how this modernity have created this divide between what's modern, what's traditional, and how really, the fiction of it, the profound fiction that is involved in this way of thinking about I don't know, modernity and our identities. I found that really interesting when you mentioned that that element.
Yeah, that's the element that really kind of captured me, because it was such a huge turning point to see right before my eyes that, oh, like dancers here are doing this really experimental contemporary work that is so sophisticated, like so beyond what we were doing in college. And college always taught me that this was like a New York City thing.
Yeah.
And in Africa, they were doing something totally different that comes from, ancient history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, in our colleges, that happened in the classroom. The students are learning the thing in the classroom. You are learning this you were learning it in your own body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was definitely some frustration with that. I mean, I think my initial response was partly frustration at my undergraduate dance curriculum for having, like, structuring the curriculum the way it did and not introducing. I mean, Africa is a gigantic continent, and I was learning about contemporary dance in Senegal, but learning about it in all these other locations because dancers would come from all over the continent, and to not have heard about any of that, right? In my 4 years of studying dance in higher education was just very unnerving and frustrating. But yeah, I mean, I feel lucky that I get to help kind of shift that for the next generation.
Ask you a question about then when I introduced you, I mentioned that you do work on gender fluidity and dance. You didn't mention this during your story, but I wonder because I also understand from reading about what you do. I also understand that the Senegal, there is a very strong reaction against gay and lesbian communities, and so your work, I was thinking, it made me think about your work. If you are, if part of your work is about dancers who are expressing themselves in this way in the state, whether or not there is a reaction against if you work, how is people reading your work in Senegal? That's what I'm trying to get at.
How are they reading my work, like my scholarship?
In Senegal, not so much here in the United States, not so much how I can picture people, the interest of people in your work here in the United States, but I'm thinking, what about in Senegal? You may not know, but I just wonder if.
Yeah, I don't fully know. I think it's still a little bit early. And I've published a few articles in the English language, in American and UK-based academic journals, and I don't think that they have much of a readership in Senegal. So I don't know if my work really gets read by any kind of like wide audience in Senegal. But that said, I've shared my work with the artists who I write about, of course, and I'm constantly in dialogue with them and talk about, like, this is how I'm talking about your work. Is it okay? Let's talk about this. Is there anything I should change? Do you want to see my writing before it goes out, before I send it to, a journal or anything like that? And they've largely been supportive of it. And I think with the understanding that it is in English and it is academic and it's probably not going to be read by anyone like in the government, anyone in a position of power in Senegal. I think if it were, they would likely have some reservations about it. So yeah. Yeah, and it didn't, my focus on gender and sexuality in my research didn't really come up in the story, largely because that didn't become clear to me in 2010 that I was talking about. That was much later. Really, when I came back to do the majority of my research for my dissertation in 2016, it became really clear to me that something really interesting was going on with gender and sexuality, and it had shifted, like from 2010 when I first started going to Senegal to 2016, a shift had occurred. So I really wanted to follow that and track it.
Any more questions? Maybe not. No? So, well, if nobody else has questions, then I guess it's time for another big round of applause. And thank you so much for really like sharing a little piece of your experience.
You're very welcome. Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bravo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
everybody.